Hey, Bridgetown family, Tyler here with some very exciting news. Registration is officially live for this year's Holy Spirit Conference at bridgetown.church/HSC. This year's conference is going to be hosted on February 7th and 8th, right here in the heart of downtown Portland at the Keller Auditorium. And we are so excited to welcome as our teachers theologian N.T. Wright from Oxford, pastor and spiritual director Gemma Ryan, who will be coming over from Ireland, and one of our very own Tim Mackey of the Bible Project. The theme that they'll be teaching on is the now and the not yet. What are the miraculous, supernatural expressions of the Holy Spirit that I can experience right now? And how does the Holy Spirit companion me in my suffering, in all the renewal that I still await? Finally, Rich and Lydia Dekas from our sister church KXC will be leading us into musical worship again alongside a lot of our Bridgetown worship team. We cannot wait. It is sure to be a very fun and very formative time for our church community and all who choose to come and join us. We hope to see you there.
Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked, and those seated in a circle around him, and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I remember the first time I realized that my parents were people. As in, they were shockingly individuals who had their own feelings and emotions and relational complexities. I was probably in the 6th grade when it happened, and while I don't remember the specifics, I do remember being both genuinely shocked and confused when I realized I was not the center of their whole world. And beyond that, that I actually had power to influence and impact their lives. Psychologists call this moment individuation, the part in our development when we begin to not only separate from our parents' identity, but develop apart from them our own distinguished sense of self in the world. This is the moment when we as children recognize that the world we're living in now actually demands our involvement. It's what some have coined growing up. This unfortunate and unavoidable moment is when we move from the comfort and joy of just receiving and existing to taking an active role in our relationships and surroundings. It's when we begin to understand that our actions and how we show up in our families or in our lives can and does impact the world. And as much as I'd love to say that this moment for me gave way to a slow, sweet, profound evolution of self, I cannot. But what I can say is that this moment taught me that growing up, knowing and seeing the world this way was never actually about independence like I thought. But instead it was and would be more about interdependence. About living in a world where I'm connected to others and to my family in a way that allows me to not just receive love, but to give it, and to know the gift that comes out of that. As it turns out, this traumatic growing up moment has led to a life of greater complexity and pain and sacrifice, but it has also led to greater meaning and joy. A few moments ago, Isabel read a familiar story, one that last year around this time we actually explored in depth. In Mark chapter 3, we find Jesus being as he always was, both ordinary and extraordinary. The scene opens and Jesus is found surrounded by a room full of people in what I imagine to be some kind of Bible study or holy moment. And just as the cameras begin to zoom in, we find Jesus' mother and brothers arriving at the scene, now loitering outside the doors of the house. Do you guys remember this? Okay, thank you, sir. Now, upon their arrival, someone lets Jesus know that his family's outside waiting for him, which has to make you wonder if this wasn't their first rodeo. But anyway, Jesus, in response to hearing this, without hesitation, looks around the room and he makes this statement: "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." For mom, mostly, like yikes, a little bit. This moment, while to us, upon hearing it, maybe for the first time or even the 100th time, it can feel stinging and even a bit cringy. I think that's the word we're saying, yeah? Yeah. But this moment in particular, is where we find Jesus in a way that only he could, subtly redefining and reframing not only how we who follow him are meant to relate to one another, but also redefining and reframing what it means to be his disciple. In this tiny, very ordinary snapshot of a moment, we find Jesus laying out what it means to live in his kingdom, to embrace the realities of it. And he says part of it is to see and to live and to relate to one another as family. It's here that Jesus, in so many ways, is inviting us, his disciples, to consider what life would look like if we saw each other the way he sees us. To consider what living like this, with this framework or paradigm, might do to us and the world he's entrusted to us if we lived this way. Jesus' redefinition of family undoubtedly has many implications that are both layered and definitely that defy predetermined social norms. And yet, it's right here that we find an invitation to us today. An invitation to get a wider view of what it means to live for the sake of others. An invitation to ask ourselves what might be true if we lived this. And beyond that, to ask what's keeping us from doing so. These are the questions that will frame our time together today. And if you didn't know, we are currently in a series called For the Sake of Others, a series that centers around our outward fruitfulness as evidence of our discipleship to Jesus, our rabbi. And last week, Pete Gregg was here with us. Yeah, and if you missed his teaching, I just want to say, please go back and listen to it. I think what he gave us was more than just a message. I believe he actually imparted greater vision for prayer, for groaning, travailing, intercessory prayer. It was such a gift to receive. Eh, mates? See? Okay. All right. Won't do that again. So anyway, today, we're going to pick up where he left off, or at least I'll try to, and we're going to continue to lean into the vision of what it means to let our transformed lives, our always forming lives, be for the sake of others, and specifically for the sake of this family. Jesus' redefinition of family in Mark 3 is going to be the lens through which we view and define our framework for how we live into this reality together. But instead of spending our time talking further about how it is defined by Jesus or why we should do this, which, by the way, we did an entire teaching series on last fall in case you missed it and want to go back to it, I think that the greater invitation for us as a community is to instead talk about the what. To talk about what keeps us from living like we're family. To take some time to be honest about the very real obstacles that keep all of us at one time or another from living this way. And so we're going to do this today in 4 movements and by asking 4 questions. First, what is possible? Second, what is broken? Third, how do we show up? And fourth, what will God do for me and you? Ready? I got to be honest with you. Thanks for the thumbs up in the back. I'm not feeling that vibe, but that's okay. We're going to go anyway, yeah? Let's get you to lunch, church. All right. First up, what is possible? This summer, I went back to regular therapy. Yay. All right, that is actually embarrassing. Okay. And wow, I can honestly say that was shocking. And second, it's been so enlightening. And by enlightening, I definitely mean kicking my butt. Turns out I am a lot less formed than I had hoped, and it appears the room knows that. But I do want to say that it's been so helpful, and specifically it's been helpful in framing day-to-day reality for me. In the midst of one of my last sessions, I was sharing with my therapist about some of the deepest or deeper desires that I've been carrying around and found myself wrestling with in this particular season. And in the midst of our conversation, really in the heat of it, when I was spinning out a bit, my therapist jumped in and she said, "Bethany, desire, as much as you want it to be, is and will not be enough to change your reality." Because she said, desire always bumps up against our limits. Yours, others, time and space. And limits, she said, is what defines what is actually possible. This reframe, it's helped me get painfully honest with myself and others. And it's also helped me see that one of the best and most essential questions we can and need to ask when it comes to relationship with one another is, what is honestly possible? Jesus' invitation to family was an invitation to a whole new way of relating. Now, there are about 750 people-ish in this room, and each of you would define and live into family differently. Maybe similar, maybe you are aligned in values, but the expression of each of your families is and will be unique to the makeup of your specific history. Meaning, Jesus' invitation to live this way or to relate in a new way, while seemingly benign and inspiring even when we hear it for the first 10 times, it isn't exactly an easy or a one-dimensional reality. Within this invitation from Jesus, lives a very real collision of our predetermined, already defined expression and expectations of family, of what relationships should or does look like, and that for most of us is where the rubber meets the road. That is, if we're honest, what actually keeps most of us from living this way. As disciples of Jesus and as Bridgetown Church, the idea of living as family with the people in this room is something that I know we desire. In fact, we say it every week from this stage. But the truth is, like I'm learning, the desire for it doesn't ensure its existence. So in order for us to really live into and understand what Jesus is calling us to, what he's saying to us about how we're meant to love one another, we'll have to first get honest and ask what's possible. What is actually possible when it comes to the relationships in this house with this family? All throughout Jesus' ministry, we thankfully see within him an example of how to answer this question. And it all ends and begins with limits. Throughout the Gospels, we see in a very real and concrete ways how Jesus lived with this reality in his own life. Over and over, as the authors of these books tell the story of Jesus' life, we find that in each 4 groups are mentioned: the 3, the 12, the 72, and the crowds. And it's these groups that give us a glimpse into what it looks like to live honestly into his invitation. Famous British psychologist, author, and professor Robin Dunbar came out with a theory in the 90s that has now been coined Dunbar's theory. And this theory, essentially through research and observation, states that there is a max number of relationships people can maintain, at least in a healthy or meaningful way. Now, here's a stolen image from the internet. And hopefully this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what I'm talking about. I don't know where to move to not be in the way, so here we are. Now, there are a couple rings here, and I just want to speak to each. You'll see that there's a ring of 2 to 5 here, and just want you to look in that area. And this space, this layer of relationship, is what Dunbar calls your inner circle. These are the people who know you best, the people who share your day-to-day life. Those are people who you would call your best friends or your loved ones. The next kind of ring is the number 15. These are 15 people, and he says this is the next level of relationship. These people are the people that you see regularly, the people that you eat with, you celebrate with, you journey through life with. These are what he calls good friends. Now we get to the 50 ring. 50 is the number of people that he says you know in real life and orbit with in the social world. And these people are the people he calls friends. And then we hit the 150 mark. And he says that these are the people with whom you can maintain meaningful contact, like some of the people you see in this room week to week. Now, beyond 150 is another ring that's like 500, and he says there's 500 people that we can actually have a relationship with. These are, he says, the number of acquaintances or people that we would recognize, but are not people with whom we'd actually relate or have an intimate, personal relationship with. I want you to think Facebook. Yeah? Now, this graph, this stolen image from the internet as a pure confession, if overlaid with Jesus' 4 groups, seems to reflect similar expressions of Dunbar's research. It seems to make sense of what Dunbar has observed as a best practice for human relationships or human flourishing. Meaning, Jesus' life, it gives us a snapshot of how to live as family, but to do so with healthy expectations. It helps us understand that though we're family, there will be limits to how we relate and who we relate to most. It won't be everyone all at once, but it will be important and essential nonetheless. The makeup of the family in this house will be like an actual family. And that, at some level, should free us to see how we can actually live for the good of everyone in it. Jesus helps us see what's possible. And that, while to some may seem narrow or just too human, each of us knows, whether we would say it or not, that within our relational lives exist limits we must live by in order to stay healthy and sane. For a lot of us, this is where the breakdown has happened as it pertains to this invitation of Jesus, not knowing what's actually possible. We've heard Jesus' invitation to family, and when we hear it, we're all in. But the problem is that many of us have had expectations that family meant that we would all live like the 3 rather than the 72. Or maybe we had an expectation that we would feel like the 12 to each other when in reality there was a limit to who our 12 could be. Or maybe we had expectations that it would be instant or easier, or that it would feel a certain way, or that it would happen sooner than it did. And at whatever level those things hit your life, you were probably left with the breakdown, the disappointment, and the disillusionment of it all. Culturally, we have been conditioned to expect limitless realities. That is just the dang truth. And we've been conditioned not just in our day-to-day lives, but in our relationships as well. I do think it's fair to say that often we bring those same limitless expectations to Jesus' vision for us, defining them on our terms, through our lens. In America, we're people who live by the efficient and linear way. We put in the formula and we get the outcome. We work harder and we get the raise. We order it on Prime and it arrives within hours. We invest and we see an immediate return. In so many ways, we live limitless. We are rarely restricted by anything. We live by momentary inspiration and believe that that is actually sufficient to get us what we want, both now and in the long run. And whether we see it or can admit it or not, that way of living, that conditioning has shaped how we view ourselves in relationship to one another in this specific family, and how we expect this definition of family to be defined. Living for the sake of others, living for the sake of our brothers and sisters in this room, whether we like it or not, it has been shaped by our instant gratification world, and this is how it usually translates in the church. Some of us operate without limits, and others try to demand that others are limitless based on our needs. Many of us, and the truth is most of us, expect the family expression, loving each other, like with the people in this room, to be like our Amazon ordering experience. Quick and fast and exactly what we want when we want it. But the truth is, relationships in the kingdom and in the world, they do not work that way. Beyond capacity limits, relationships are slow and they take time. which means that they'll require us to live by conviction and not just inspiration. Dunbar's theory and Jesus' way of relating frames what we can expect. That it's not possible to get the quick fix or to live connected to everyone all the time. And while those two things this morning might sound like a little bump of depression, I do want to say that there is freedom in it. I've talked to so many of you about your experience in this particular room. So many of you, I know, walk into this place filled with people and you often feel so lonely. And that, if I can just say it, is a true story. It is a real and important and noteworthy experience. And yet, it is also an invitation to, instead of that, or letting that be the reason that you walk out of this house, to let it be the reason you actually stay. And let the encouragement to what is possible be your on-ramp for finding your way forward into our family. Instead of looking in this room and thinking about how many people we don't know, what if we looked around and wondered how many people we could know? Who could be my 3? Who could be my 15? Who could be my 50? This is exactly why we run Bridgetown Communities and Alpha and the Practicing the Way course and the Covenant Community course. We don't just love standing up here while you're putting in a fresh piece of gum every Sunday, sharing that information with you. We do it because it's an invitation to not just be the crowds. If you're not in community, you should go to Basics next week. And if you're already in a community, you should go to the Covenant Community course that starts today. And if all of that feels like too much too soon, then you should try Alpha this week or the Practicing the Way course that starts this week. These are our invitations to you to know and to be known. And look, we have no expectation that you will know and love everyone in this room perfectly. In fact, those of us who feel at home in a room like this, we likely don't know a ton of people in it too. But we do know a few. Our 5, our 15, our 50. Now, I sincerely hope that at whatever level, what I just said, even though it was a little bit tough, encourages you, and I mean that. But I also want to be honest with you and say that we're not quite done yet, because enough of you hear what I just said, and you have your 5, and you have your 15 in your community, and you still feel the rub of this invitation of Jesus, of life together. You still feel that occasional, do I even matter to these people, or what does family here even mean? And that ache that all of us feel at some point forces us to ask our next question: what is broken? Now, admittedly, that is a totally intense question. So I'm going to ask it another way, maybe more gently. How am I regularly relating to those around me? In psychology, this question is connected to and termed relational patterns. And these are simply repeated and consistent ways in which we interact with and respond to the people with whom we are in relationship. We all have these, and we all bring these with us everywhere we go. Be blessed this Sunday morning. Like I mentioned earlier, there are about 750 people in this room, and each of you are bringing in it a history and a story. And truth be told, you're not just bringing your story, but the story of those who have gone before you, stories that you didn't choose, and stories that have both been written and lived into. And that reality, while we don't often think about it, it actually does mean that we're bringing that to Jesus' invitation to live for the sake of others, to live for the sake of the family, a unique way of relating that will and has been shaped by how we love and even expect to be loved by each other. And look, it would be easy to write me off as like a modern, brilliant teacher. But this isn't just a 21st century thing. If we look back again to Jesus' world, we find that relational patterns, historic, consistent, and repeated ways of relating were brought into and were part of the early disciples' life too. The inner 12, to be exact. In Matthew 20, just a few chapters over from the text that was read today, is a story about a mother of two of the disciples, James and John, who wanted her sons to sit at Jesus' right hand. Do you remember that? She sounds Southern to me. Now, anyway, at face value, this doesn't seem like that strange of a request, but within it we find a family system, a pattern of relating. Yes, a mother who wants the best for her boys and probably thinks they hung the moon, but beyond that, we also see a desire for success, for status and position. Place, it seems to matter to this family. It mattered to this mother. While this isn't a perfect example of relational patterns, and we don't have tons of details in the story, what I do want us to see here is that this is a moment where real people are relating honestly with their bents and broken desires. And it's there that we find Jesus in the middle of it, responding to them, and even more so inviting them to see beyond what they know and even what they desire to a different way of both being and relating. You can read the rest of that story later. Now we see this again with Peter. Remember old Pete? Sweet guy. In Mark 14, we read the story of Jesus heading to the cross, and before he makes his way to the garden to pray, we read that he told his disciples that they would all fall away or leave him when the time came for him to lay down his life. And Peter, like we all would, says, even if everyone else does, I won't. And Jesus says to him, you will. And in fact, you will deny me 3 times. And then Pete, because he can't help himself, says again, I won't. Peter, despite what Jesus, the King of the universe, just said to him about who he is and what he would do, believed and carried forward with his way of being and his way of relating. It seems that both his heart and response to crises was so deeply ingrained in him that he couldn't even hear what Jesus was saying to him. There's something about how Peter saw himself, about what Peter brought to the relationship that shaped how this story went. And again, this may not be the most perfect example, but I'm hoping that you're getting my point. In both of these stories, we get a context for the reality that each of us, despite being saved by Jesus, still brings certain ways of relating to each other and to him. And that helps us see that there could be things that we are needing healing from. Patterns of relating, patterns we are living in despite knowing Jesus. All of us, all of you and me, but in a beautiful way, have patterns of relating. Some of us are relationally fearful, others avoidant, and others anxious. All of us have ways we love and have been loved, and that shapes our expectations and our expression of both. All of us have things we use to protect ourselves or to protect others, and each of those things are probably, and by probably I mean they are, connected and linked to the family we come from. And each of those things, any of those things that are broken or out of alignment, unhealed places within us, each of those things can be shaped, or maybe better said, reshaped by entering into God's family. Jesus' invitation to live as family, it's not just a kumbaya invitation. It isn't him wanting peace long enough in the church or at Bridgetown so he can deal with the bigger crises in our city or on the earth. Jesus' invitation to family was and is an extraordinary multidimensional gift, because within it we have the potential to be both healed and made healers. In it, we can see ways we couldn't without living this way, ways and places in us that still need to be healed. And at the same time, we can receive from each other the healing that we need. So many of us struggle with living like family because when we do, we bump up against a way of relating that maybe needs to change or to be shaped by Jesus' presence or his truth. And as we lean into this invitation of Jesus, we are and we will be forced to see honestly the depths of our own needs. We won't be able to put it on someone else in the group. We won't be able to blame it on some beautiful pastor that serves in our community. The truth is, as we love each other as family, the reality of what we missed or what we needed will often rise to the surface. And that's hard. I mean honestly, that is so hard. Living like family, it means, though, despite its hardship, that we also get to know redemption all the way to our bones, and sometimes to our grandma's bones. We get to upend broken relational patterns and make new ones, and we can't do it any other way. In living like family, we actually get a taste of life as it was meant to be. This summer, I read the famous bestseller, The Covenant of Water by Abraham Voorhees. Anybody? Yes? Okay, everybody has some homework to do this week. It's such a good book. It's the perfect beach read, in case you're in need of one. A page turner with also an ability to suck you in deeper and deeper by each chapter. So good. I feel alone in this. Anyway, the book has everything, but at the heart of it, it was a story about a family. The broken, honest, real, messy story that family often is. And what stood out to me most wasn't the mess of their struggle or the dysfunction laid out over 1,000 pages, but instead it was the beauty of it all. The ebb and flow of relationship and the way everyone eventually found their place in the story. It's reminded me a lot of what we're talking about today in this invitation from Jesus. That while it is undoubtedly messy, it is an invitation to know the beauty it can bring to know that we all have a place in the story. Yes, it's an invitation to live beyond yourselves, but it's also an invitation to see what we become as we both give and receive love. Yes, it's an invitation to wake up, both to who we are and to how we love each other, and to see that that's as important as who and why we love. And that leads us to our next question. How do we show up? Another way to say this is, what posture are we to take as we enter into this family? Within our honesty about what it means or might mean for us and what obstacles we face in living as family also comes a choice. And the choice, I believe, centers so much around this idea of what scholars and theologians have coined the true self and the false self. Now, if you're familiar with this, the true self is an authentic expression of who we are, encompassing our genuine thoughts, feelings, values, and beliefs. It reflects our core identity. It's honest and free from social pressures or expectation, and at its core lives real vulnerability. You know, the kind that opens you up to being seen for who you really are, all the good and all the bad, and selfish, and quick to anger, judgmental, and insecure parts of you. The false self, on the other hand, is the part of you that represents more of a persona. This is often shaped by external validation, social norms, and the desire to fit in. It's rarely connected to our true values and beliefs, despite how it masquerades. At its core lives what I'm calling faux vulnerability. You know, the kind that opens us up just enough to be respected, but not enough to actually take the risk of being seen or thought of as lesser. My point, and I could say a lot of things about this one, and I wanted to, but they told me I couldn't. For time, not for any other reasons. My point is, the thing I want us to get is our posture, the levels of vulnerability where we are willing to share with each other what we are willing to give to one another. It will directly affect the depth of relationship we have. It will directly affect both our connection to one another and the way that we feel connected. So if you have not been feeling connected, there are some questions to ask about how you've been showing up. Superficial conversations, they only move to personal, meaningful ones when someone is willing to take the risk of being known more deeply. Polite sentiments, they mean very little until they're actually connected to someone's life and present need. If we want to know the very real experience of being family, the posture we take will have to be an open, and vulnerable one. And for many of us, and again, I guess I'll just say for all of us, that won't be easy. And there will be risk and fear and exposure involved. But I can also say it will be so worth it. It's probably not lost on you that I've never been very shy about sharing my life with others, for better and for worse. I have rarely not answered a personal question honestly when asked even by strangers. But the truth is, my ability to share with thousands of you on a weekend or with a random individual who's heard my story or knows a bit about my journey is still in many ways less vulnerable for me than in some of my more day-to-day spaces. This summer, I needed help, like real help. And I remember talking to Tyler on the phone right at the beginning of what was a moment of genuine panic and fear. And he said something to me that changed and challenged our friendship and many of my other relationships. He said, "I can't help or defend you, Bethany, if you keep helping and defending yourself." And when he said that, I became acutely aware of the vulnerability I still was unable to offer him. Someone I genuinely trust and love. And I became aware of what I still wasn't bringing to him or the other elders for fear that being known in that way would change what they thought of me or how they loved me. But I can tell you that one of the best things that happened to me this year was finally showing up with nothing. Being seen for all that I had and didn't have, and being loved anyway, right in the midst of what was most exposed in me. It changed me to ask for help from the people that I love. It changed me to depend on others like they were my actual biological family. It changed me to open up the places in my heart and life that carried the most vulnerability and fear. And it also changed me to be loved right within those places. It's not easy. It's just not. And I'm not saying that as rhetoric. I'm saying that to you as a real person. It is not easy. But if we will choose to posture ourselves open and vulnerable and honest, we will have the chance to be loved in ways we didn't think was possible. We could know love deeper than some of us have known love from our families. We can know the goodness of God in places we never knew to ask for it, but if we aren't postured to receive it and to give it, we never can. The posture we take, the posture you take, the posture I take, it matters. And our posture, it is the on-ramp for us to know now the future realities of what will one day always be true. And that leads us to our final question today. What will God do for me and you? This is an honest question we have to ask, because the truth is what I've presented today could be seen as a less than compelling case for family. So to put it bluntly, I want to end by talking about what we get out of it. A very helpful human motivator. So here's the question: what will God do for me? Hopefully you've heard at least a bit of a whisper of this answer in some of the things that I've talked about today, but I will lay it out plainly. All throughout the scriptures, we are met with a promise when it comes to living as family, and it's this: that as we do, we will know and see not only the reality of God's kingdom here on earth, but we will also know the reality of what will one day always be true. So what will God do for me? Well, he'll usher in his whole kingdom. He'll bring healing to your heart and your mind and your soul as you eat around a table with others week after week. He'll make you into a person of love as you die to yourself in both big and convenient ways and small ways. And he will teach you how to carry burdens for others and how to let that shape your prayers and imaginations for what is possible through Jesus' Spirit. And he, best of all, best of this whole gig, here's the best thing: he will give you eyes to see him, who he really is, through the tangible, ordinary, consistent, rubbing, and annoying practice of family. He will let you partake in a heavenly reality here and now. And then He'll do the same for those around you. So that was me. What about you? For the other people you love, for the people in this room, he will usher in his whole kingdom. And he'll bring healing to their hearts and minds and souls as they eat around a table with you week after week. And he'll make them into people of love as they die to themselves in both big inconvenient ways and small ways. And he'll teach them how to carry your burdens and how to let that shape both their prayers and imaginations for what's possible through Jesus' Spirit. And he'll open their eyes to see him, who he really is, through the tangible, ordinary, consistent, rubbing, and annoying practice of family. These questions, I think, could be summed up best with this one. What will he do for us? As we live into this, he will make us, in Paul's language, a colony of heaven, a piece of heaven on earth. He will make us a place where people come to have their stories rewritten, a place where they can know again or in new ways that God's truth over who they are is greater than anything that the pain of their past has told them. He will make us a family. He will make us brothers and sisters, people who live like siblings, which can I just remind you, if you have a sibling in the room, you know it's not perfect. And they're annoying. And they keep showing up to things you don't want them to show up at. And yet they're part of you. They're part of who you are in a way that's different than how your parents are part of you. He will make us into a people who carry each other's burdens, who, like Felix, wash people's cars, who pick up each other's kids, who know the sweetness and the safety of unconditional love, who know the goodness of the kingdom of God we all so desperately long for. Living for the sake of the family. You know it because you've experienced it. It is costly. And it is far more radical than it sounds. But it is a part of our formation that is necessary in order for us to know the fullness of God's goodness and his kingdom. I remember the first time I realized my parents were people. Because it was that moment that I also realized that I was part of something so much bigger than myself. And that reality helped me see that how I lived and who I loved, it mattered. And not just for me, but for them too. The Apostle Paul, in all his letters to the church, he emphasized both the significance and the necessity of the people of God living as family. He emphasized the idea of growing up and having a growing up moment, living awake to the gift and the responsibility that we have to each other. And this exhortation, while beautiful, wasn't simply a theory, it wasn't a novel idea. It was to Paul born out of the pure desperation that comes in knowing that we all need more than just a singular reality when it comes to living life in the kingdom of God. Paul knew that in order to know the fullness of what God has for us here and now, we would need to live not just as polite pilgrims, but as real family, real broken, messy family, pouring out our ever-transforming selves for the other. And he knew that was a mess, that it was a dangerous invitation, but he knew even more so the power of the Spirit, the mystery of God that happens when we lean in by faith and say, I'm willing to love this way. He knew that living this way meant that we would know and find more of Jesus, and that we would also get a taste that could not be quenched for the kingdom that was coming. My whole life has been marked by this gift of the family of God, and I know that's a luxury. I've lived a life full of people not treating me kindly, but making me their actual family. And it's not because I'm darling. There's a whole other side to this that you don't want. As I was writing this teaching, a myriad of images and memories have been flooding my mind to the point of a few emotional breakdowns. Because best I can remember, There isn't one scene from my whole life that doesn't include familial love from someone else who is not my biological family. Being raised in the church, living life with others in a local church family, it has afforded me many moments of pain, but many more moments of transcendent, miraculous goodness. The truth is, I don't have time to tell you about it, about my first chapters here at Bridgetown Church, or about this past summer when people like Tyler and Gerald didn't love me from a place of partnership or what I could bring to the table, but loved me when I had nothing to give them and was desperate to know God's goodness and strength through the integrity of a man. I don't have time to tell you about the million-course dinners that I have had provided to me by both Peter and Stephanie, and how each have reminded me through expense and love and prayers that I am something far more than I could ever see myself. I don't have time to talk to you about Morgan and Karen and the amount of times I've eaten at their countertop or on their front porch as they've given me both shelter and a sense of home when I so desperately needed it. I don't have time to tell you about Jess and Josh and how they have called and checked in and taken out and sacrificed and loved me in a way that only family could. I don't have time to tell you about my friends Charlie and Catherine and how for almost a decade now their friendship and their leadership has broadened and deepened my understanding of what's possible in the kingdom. I don't have time to talk to you about how Buddy never stops taking care of me or my house, or how many times he's had a handyman just pop by, or mowed my lawn, or sprinkled whatever dust you put into a lawn to make it better. Or how Goliath is a spiritual mother to me who prays for me with the authority of a prophet and who also will get mad at anyone who she even thinks remotely was mean to me. I don't have time to tell you about the hundreds of texts that Marnie has sent me, weekend by weekend, filled with prayers and blessings. I don't have time to tell you the stories because only eternity could capture what God has done for me through his church, through his family, through the people in this room. And you're just from this chapter of my life. The thing I want to leave you with today is the truth that there is a mystery to living into this invitation with Jesus. There is an equation in it that I can guarantee means you will receive far more love than you ever give. That even as you pour out, so you will be poured into. The greatest love I have ever known and the greatest healing I have ever received has come through living as family and living for the sake of the family. And there is an invitation for you and me today to know and to continue to know the same. So, what is keeping you from doing this? And what might be true if you lived this way?